Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're back with Matthew Harrison, and today we're talking about the idea of employee theft and fraud, which I think should be super interesting. So, if you would like to kick off by introducing yourself, and then maybe they haven't listened before and they can go back and listen to our back catalog.
Hello, my name is Matthew Harrison. I'm an attorney. I'm the principal attorney and owner of Harrison Law. We're a Phoenix law firm, uh, primarily clients throughout the United States, a few throughout internationally as well. And we're a business boutique law firm, which means our primary clientele are either businesses, but then the individuals who own and operate businesses.
Mm.
And so I have that. I've been practicing law for almost 30 years. My next year is my 30th anniversary. And part of that is I was also a deputy county attorney, prosecuting attorney in Phoenix metropolitan area, which has over 4 million people now. And so that's the background I have that's going to help with this subject, I believe, as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And then we always like to ground in this question, who would benefit from listening to this podcast? Like maybe the size of businesses or
I think any business would benefit from this podcast, whether it be an individual who's just starting the process of hiring employees. I think this will be beneficial, but also if you're in either the business leadership or in HR, and deal with employees on a regular basis, I think that that would also help. Employment theft and what happens when that occurs affects both multi-billion-dollar businesses, but also affects the mom and pop shops. And it can be often be fatal to the smaller business organizations if you don't handle the situation properly.
okay, so theft is kind of a broad idea. What are they thieving?
Well, usually there's two main aspects that they thieve when it comes to or theft. First is actual money. So I think that that often is the first source of theft when it comes to employees, would be actual money being either taken away from the business or money coming into the business that is not actually received by the business. It's fraudulently utilized by the employee. The second area is materials. A lot of times that theft is of actual tangible items that all of a sudden is no longer within the possession of the business. I'll often see that happen in certain businesses where you have um, either it's a retail setting or it's a construction setting. So actual inventory is being lost. Physical items are being lost. It could be anything from an actual retail piece of furniture, an item, whatever it is, but it also can just be the materials, uh, copper, copper piping, wiring, electronic devices, electronic installation devices. All those things have a pretty nice black market and or illegal avenue that you can often sell that to as well.
Wow, because I was thinking intellectual property theft, like, I don't know, ideas or data nowadays, data, but I wasn't thinking things, items. Like, of course, yeah, copper piping is one of the most expensive materials right now, chips, things like that. But do these not go missing pretty quickly and you know the culprit pretty easily?
When it comes to actual physical items, such as the inventory, usually the employee has a system in place to hide his or her activities for at least a period of time. And unless a business has a very strict inventory process in place with redundancies, usually that employee has ways to game the system. And so you'll often see that occur. And when you talked about intellectual property, people often think about that because it's often the news and lawsuits.
Mhm.
Usually, intellectual property is the easiest to be able to find, and it's also the one that's easiest to be able to pursue either in litigation, lawsuits, and items like that, because that's a little bit easier to check and track because knowledge, patents, name recognition, information like that is a lot easier to track along those lines. So the nefarious employee who steals a multi-million dollar idea although interesting when it comes to what you see in the media, is often not the culprit.
Oh, really? Okay. Uh, and then when we're talking about money, how do you not trace back to someone that they suddenly, I guess, own an island now? How do you trace all that?
Usually tracing items is something that is discovered over time. Usually the employment theft or when an employee starts taking items from a business, it often happens in smaller increments. Now, altogether, if you combine all the theft by employees in the United States, the latest statistics state that that type of employee theft is around 30 to 50 billion dollars a year in the United States alone. And so these are just items that cumulatively over thousands of businesses are being taken. And then oftentimes businesses think, well, employees don't really, that's not where my loss is coming from theft. They often think of shoplifting or someone breaking into a business. And no, that's not the case. Usually shoplifting is extremely low percentage. And it's, if anything was going to shoplift something from your business, usually it's the employee taking inventory, not some random person coming in and stealing some item. And so you often have to think about that. And that often happens in the bigger ticket financial settings as well. And when I trained people in the past about employment theft, people often think is that to steal from a bank, it's someone who shows up with a gun and a bag. And usually that when a person shows up with a gun and a bag, alarms go off. You usually have an explosive paint device in the bag that they give the money into, and nowadays a GPS tracker. And usually the success of someone actually robbing a bank is fairly slim to none. However, I have seen on multiple occasions employees of a bank or managers of the bank steal hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars by just walking it out the door and by tricks that they've learned over time. That's where the real losses come into play when it comes to these businesses.
You're talking they're walking out with cash, not that they're making little secret transfers or what?
A little bit of both. And you'll see that is that if there's not a good tracking system in place, whether it be a larger institution or even a small business, it often involves two different, cash, just cash over time, or they transfer from a record standpoint items into other accounts. Those other accounts become accessible to them, and then they withdraw or transfer funds from those accounts. You'll see that as well. But for, say, a smaller business, a smaller, I would say a dozen employees or 25 employees or less, the cash in the cash drawer or the cash when it comes to the cash on hand on a business is often one of the places where an employee will start to skim fairly quickly. And I've seen circumstances where one employee over time was able to steal close to $100,000 by just $200 here, $100 there, what was in the cash for readily purchases and things like that. And if you're not tracking cash, because cash is the hardest to track, you are going to see those issues occur over time.
That's very interesting because I live in London and there's very little cash. Besides the nail salon, most places are cash free or very low cash, maybe grocery stores. But then in the grocery stores, every item on the shelf is locked up lately. Like, or they'll give you like the box, but it's empty of the laundry detergent because the mindset is the theft must be the people that can't afford at times these items from stores, like formula is always locked up everywhere, things like that.
Yeah.
So that's just a perception.
Yeah, that's usually a perception. People often think about that it's the person who's just stealing something and running away. And for the most part, that's not where the losses of a store or company are based out of. It's more involved with the person who's handing you that empty box and whatever they are taking off on the side and selling someplace else, whether it be a website or to an organization for cash. And you'll often see that. And I often caught people selling these items on various websites like eBay back in the day and other things like that, where all of a sudden it would show up as that inventory. And instead of an actual person stealing a box of detergent or a loaf of bread, often that's not the case. And when the detergent is stolen, it's usually because it's part of the manufacturing or drug process.
Mhm.
But usually that's not the case. So maybe there's some rare occurrences, maybe in certain areas where there's a high shoplifting issue along those lines, but usually that is not going to make or break a location.
Wow. Okay. And so you have a business and you don't want to go into business or continue a business where you're fostering this like sense of distrust with employees because it could actually backfire and lead to more losses. I would assume more, well, they don't trust me, they don't trust us. Why would I care? So, how do you recognize the signs when there really is a problem versus becoming this like overly paranoid company?
And something I want to highlight about this is that the psychology of somebody who steals at that basis, they're just waiting for a justification. It has nothing to do with what the employer does. If people are honest, even if they may not like certain policies or procedures or who they work with, they're still going to be honest. If they don't like an employer, they're going to find another job. However, in the mindset of someone who takes those items, they're just waiting for a rationalization to occur. And
Mhm.
in their mind, they find a rationalization to occur. And that's why it's often when employers don't really look at who is stealing the items like that. Because a lot of times people think who's stealing the items? It's the big guy or the big rough person with the tattoos and the language and everything like that. Usually, when it comes to the demographics of who steals in those circumstances, it's primarily female. It's primarily between the ages of 30 to 50. And it's primarily a female that also may have children as well. So it's kind of you don't notice that. It's not the typical person who's going to steal. But that's something that you'll often see when it comes to that. So you have to almost change your perspective. And a lot of times they'll rationalize in their mind when they steal.
Mhm.
But again, then it becomes just, oh, my employer's not been nice to me, or I didn't get that raise I wanted, and therefore I steal. Usually they're just waiting for an excuse. And usually they've stolen from past employers as well. But when it comes to signs, when it comes to the circumstances, I would say that there is a list, I'd say about the top five or top 10 that I'll see on a regular basis that are the kind of the initial warning signs is number one, employees living above their means with some extravagant or large volume of purchases. Usually that's a warning sign. When you know an employee and you know what their wages are, but all of a sudden things are happening where all of a sudden they have big trucks and cars and new things that they're wearing every day, that's sometimes a warning flag. And oftentimes when people or other employees question them, they're saying, "Oh, my spouse got a raise," or "Oh, I won this money at a casino," or something along those lines. Second conversation that you'll usually see is you'll see lows in levels of sales transactions. So if it's like a retail situation where someone is stealing from a retail situation, you'll see lows in inventory to sales transactions that show that something else is going on. They'll take procedural shortcuts in order to perform certain actions. It's almost as if they're skipping certain smaller policies, but their ultimate reasoning is that, oh, I'm trying to do this so it gets done faster. Usually they don't like those smaller procedures because those smaller procedures catch them when it comes to the situation. The employee changes their work habits, arriving early before anyone else, working through their lunch hour, or maybe they're around after hours when individuals are not present. Usually, that is the prime time for somebody to either steal inventory because no one's around, or cash or route money to them. And I often saw that as well, is that the employer would come in because again, I was a prosecuting attorney and I was prosecuting theft and fraud schemes and forgery. And the employer would come in just surprised, saying, she was my best worker. She would come in 30 minutes before anyone
Mm.
else did. And sometimes she would just work through lunch. And I'd say, go take a lunch. She says, no, I'm too busy. I don't want to take a lunch. Or they're around, after hours as well. And then they discovered the reason why they do that is so they can do items first before people notice. And the reason why they didn't want to go to lunch is that they were waiting for the mail to arrive, because then they would take the mail and anything that would point to theft going on, they would pull out. And so the employee would never see it. So certain bank statements or credit card statements, where all of a sudden there was these purchases or items that were being taken, or they would take checks for payments, washing the check and putting their own names on it as well.
Mm.
But that was the way, as a diligent employee, they were able to keep the employer in the dark longer because of the situation. So you always have to do that. And so also the employees that are physically out of sight or work alone as part of that too. There's reasons why a lot of people want to do that. It may be just a personal preference, but if somebody is consistently, you cannot track what they're doing, odds are it increases that they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. So that's just a few handful of things I can just think off the top of my head that shows the circumstance.
Okay. And then in those circumstances, if you spot someone, because you have to be careful because you don't want to blame people that are not. And usually there can be a lot of people in like vulnerable roles in this situation. But what do you do if you start spotting these warning signs and you see the missing things? Because that seems more black and white that it would be you call the police. So what are you doing then? How does that work?
If if you are suspicious, if items come to light, and a lot of times those items will come to light if you foster an environment with your employees. If your employees see something odd, that they feel comfortable coming to the supervisor as well. Um, and you foster that environment. Probably the first item that you want to do is start a private investigation within the company itself to figure out what's going on. And usually that would involve either the principal of the company, usually whoever you have that's responsible for HR with the company. And then also you might engage an accountant or bookkeeper with the company. If your bookkeeper isn't the one taking money, which
Yeah.
often unfortunately happens, but you would have like maybe a third party accountant come in and just view items. And often in larger metropolitan areas, they have CPAs that specialize in this. So they just really kind of are able to dive down. And so you would do an independent investigation and you'd watch that employee as well during this process and behavior. And then once it's confirmed, then what I would typically recommend is you fire fast. You have to get them out of the business. And that would be more in conjunction with either the owner and HR, basically bringing someone in, um, confronting them with what was discovered, seeing what their behavior or actions are. But realistically, it's terminating them with cause and out the door that day, because you don't want them to remain in the business because they, number one, start destroying evidence, or they might do the final acts of theft. You often see that as well. So you have to really start that procedure. Now, whether you involve law enforcement is going to be kind of on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. Technically, it's a theft. A lot of times it involves forgery. If it's a really big situation, it's a fraud schemes, which are serious felonies in most jurisdictions in the United States. And it's a balancing act, and it just depends on the employer involved. Some employers have a strict policy that they always pursue prosecution. Others do not. I, as a former prosecuting attorney, prefer option number one because I think you need to get the government involved or the prosecutorial agencies or the police system involved because odds are extremely high that this is not the first time they've done it. Often If they're in the 30s to 40s, it's like their second, third, fourth time they've done it. And realistically, often an investigative agency will find more than one victim. And it might be a past employer. It might be
Mhm.
something along those lines. So that's something you always have to keep in mind as well.
There's a lot of trust in here that we're talking about, where there's a lot relying on you building enough trust with your employees that they speak up if they see something, say something, and then also in a larger organization, like, I don't know, I was thinking like a grocery store chain or something, that your managers also feel safe to speak up if they feel like they finding that employee they feel safe in their job, that they can speak up, that they think someone might be stealing, things like that. And then you also have to bring in bias and things. So while this is all happening, how do you communicate to staff? How do you make it clear to everyone that this is do you keep it private, or do you actually say like this person was fired with cause because we believe they are stealing? Do you make an example out of them? How do you do it in a way that is both legal and creates the type of culture you want?
First item I always recommend that businesses have, and again, this can be either big businesses or small businesses, is that you have policies written in place how you're going to address this issue. And I often tell individuals is that you develop an employee handbook with teeth. You have to really spell that out when it comes to what is the responsibility of the employee, and thou shalt not do these things. And oftentimes employers think, well, isn't that obvious? And I go, yes, it is obvious. But you need to write it down, not just because you're trying to prevent someone from taking it, but you also want to give the other co-employees a little bit more confidence that this is the policy. So if they go to like a supervisor or something like that, they're actually following that policy. And and then you're also providing some strict barriers on who would be responsible for what.
Mm.
And if an employee does not have the need to be responsible for inventory or bookkeeping or money exchange or whatever the case is, then they shouldn't be involved. And so you always have that in the corporate organization as well. And then when you have individuals who you might want to encourage to also be worthwhile to go out there and actually tell if something is happening. Usually that comes from a relationship where the individual feels a comfort level with their supervisor or manager
Yeah.
or whomever it is. And a lot of times I encourage them to have like quarterly meetings, or if they have a monthly meeting with everyone together, and part of the subject on occasion of those meetings is, hey, this is employee theft, this is really important that we watch this, we need to have those items in place. You're not going to get in trouble. um, Complaints or when items are noticed are going to be handled privately. It's not like we're going to come and say, well, Jane saw you do this or anything like that. And so
Yeah.
if you see something which may be suspicious or may not, inform HR, inform the individuals involved.
But then if it goes to court, you may still be called to be a witness, right?
Potentially, a lot of times, the individual who is the employee who sees something suspicious, usually because that's all they see is see something suspicious. Usually it's deemed as irrelevant. So you
Mm.
don't really need to get into it, other than the employee saying something like, my employee saw some suspicious behavior. But then the formal investigation, well, what did the employer do? And then the individuals involved in the investigation, which again is the principal, maybe the HR manager, possibly a bookkeeper, accountant, those are usually the primary witnesses that would be in any prosecution. And you can kind of tell that to employees. I mean, would if somebody is prosecuted, maybe the name of the employee who said that there was suspicious behavior would come out, yes. But The actual testifying, the actual work, that's usually performed by other individuals. And usually, depending on the criminal jurisdiction in the United States, there's victim and witness rights, which means that that potential perpetrator can't contact that individual during prosecution or after prosecution because that individual just mentioned that situation. So that usually can be shared with employees that you'll keep it as quiet as possible, and you're not going to be naming them during the confrontation meeting with this employee. You don't say, well, Tim told us this. No, you say, an employee, and we've noticed the items through investigation, and it's been noticed by us, it's been noticed by employees. We started our investigation, and this is the conclusion of our investigation. So that way they never know. Uh, and then they can kind of blame whomever in their own mind, but realistically, it doesn't have the ability to really change it beyond that.
So this is preparation. This is like if theft happens, make sure you have this in place. Are there things you can do to prevent it from happening?
Yeah. Probably the main encouragement I give all employees, whether it be big or small, is that you thoroughly check potential hires. It's hire slow, fire fast philosophy. And a lot of times you should use the hiring process to take advantage to help identify individuals and risks before they're even hired. And in some circumstances, that might be number one, performing a criminal background check, depending on the nature and items like that. It might include drug testing, depending on what's going on the nature and items like that. Different jurisdictions have different rules, but that's something that you can do as well. Usually, it is okay for you to ask interviewees if they have any past criminal convictions involving honesty or theft. And that's fine to ask depending on the jurisdiction. But again, that's just jurisdiction specific. So in certain states, you'll want to double check that. But you would often do that as well. And then when I would call references. And a lot of people nowadays don't call references. And I always encourage people to call references. And a lot of times references are afraid, oh my gosh, if I say something bad about this crazy employee, he's going to sue
Yeah.
me. So then what you do is you approach it this way. You don't really come out and you say, did he do this or did she do this? But I often encourage them to do open-ended questions where you're kind of getting them to say something like, here's an open-ended question like this. What are some of the areas of which you would not recommend this person to us? Have it leave it open-ended. And they often share information. Or you might say, what are some areas where the employee may require additional supervision? Now, either one of those can be very broad, it's very open-ended, but if someone's had an issue with an employee before involving dishonesty or theft, usually that's when it will come out. And they might even hedge their bets and they won't tell you out front what happens. But usually, I've literally had theft circumstances where a prior employer told the employee who got robbed, virtually robbed, literally robbed. They said during the interview process, I wouldn't have them handle money. And that's a big
Red
warning
flag.
flag right there. That unfortunately that victim ignored it, but often that's the case. Or they say, "Oh, I wouldn't have them not closely supervised," or "Oh, I don't think," they'll say things that will again avoid having them be sued by this other employee, but they'll give you enough warning flags to say, "Okay, we need to either investigate further on this individual, or we just need to say no because of the red flag that's developed there." So you can often do items like that, do those checks, do those circumstances. Usually when an employee starts to really get good at this, they've done it multiple times before. And usually when they steal from the employer, they'll start small, like a small minor amount, maybe a few $100s before they go for a bigger thing because they're testing the system to see if the system catches them. And that's something I tell employers as well. If you get an employee who does that minor first step, you still terminate them
Of course,
because
it's still stole.
they're testing the waters. You just have to. You have to have a zero tolerance policy.
Mm.
because I've seen that before as well, where someone's somehow mistakenly $600 went missing and they never did anything about it with this employee, and all of a sudden this employee stole over six figures eventually later on. They always test the waters to see if they can game the system.
Wow. Yeah, that is a big difference between a couple hundred and a couple 100,000. But yeah,
Yeah, and it often happens that way, and then they'll start sabotaging the company along the way as well.
wow. I think I've never been very interested in being a manager, owning my own business. I'm self-employed for a reason because it just doesn't seem worth it if you have to not trust people, but you have to protect what you've worked hard to build. So I totally agree with it. It just doesn't sound like something for me because that puts you in a difficult position to still build. Like you have to almost go through these legal processes because you don't want your employees to think you distrust everyone or you distrust by default, but that you actually found a very clear pattern.
Yeah. And you're really, as you're trying to find these potential people, you're looking for those individuals who have the mindset that, okay, these guidelines are in place for a reason. I understand it. I'm an employee. I don't want this to happen. I want to keep my job. I want this business to grow because I want to grow too within this business. And you're looking for those employees that have that perspective. And then you're avoiding those aren't showing that behavior and other items like that. You always have to just make sure that you're doing that. And it may start in other areas. Uh, a lot of times there's a psychological term called gathering the monkeys, which comes from a Wizard of Oz, where somebody who is the wizard, the wicked witch, who are gathering the monkeys. The monkeys are going to do her bidding. And a lot of times in those employee theft situations, or when you have a bad employee like that, they usually try to recruit others to defend them. But those others who are defending them don't know all the full picture as well. So you almost have to watch out for those personalities too, to make sure that you're not bringing that kind of environment in, because that's where trouble starts.
Mhm. And when in doubt, get the paperwork, follow the paper trail because you
Yep.
don't want to accuse anyone wrongfully, of course, either.
Yeah, and that's where you have to have those accounting and procedures in place. And that's something that a brand new business, they're kind of starting out on the shoestring. They're just trying things out. And then they grow, they establish, they have a good business model they know is profitable. But then if they haven't already, they need to have those financial checks and balances in place to be able to track those items. I often see this in a contractor type of employment theft where they just never developed an inventory system. So they can't really, they can see if there's a big thing missing in the warehouse or not, but they don't know the volume of other small things as well. Um, Copper piping is one of the easiest things that's stolen. Number one, because copper prices are high right now. But if someone's going to take a 16 foot long copper tube, you're not going to really notice it unless you have the inventory where you're counting it on a regular basis
Mhm.
and you notice it's missing as well. So you'll often see that too when it comes to employment theft.
Okay. No, absolutely. And also, if you get audited or investigated in any way, you need those paper trails anyway. So get them started now.
Yeah, get them started now because I'll see that as well because people are sometimes building businesses because their thought process is they're going to sell it. And that's going to be part of it. And I always encourage people, if that's even your goal, you're going to have that accounting system in place because if someone's going to purchase your business, they're going to look for that as well. So even in the best case scenario where you might have a profitable business and you sell it and you decide to go golfing and on vacation for a good period of time, you still want to have those inventory processes in place, procedures.
Yeah, absolutely. Hit by the bus running a business or a nicer way, like if you win the lottery, who can run it for you? Yeah.
Yeah, have that management team in place that you can trust. And again, that's something that over time you have to learn to hire in perspective too as well. And then you have someone monitoring the managers.
Mhm.
Yeah, maybe a third party outside of the organization, accountant, bookkeeper, having the policies and procedures in place to be able to handle the situation.
Anything else I should be asking you right now?
No, but I'll share a story that I often do when I have these meetings when you can kind of see the employment theft. There's a small town in a mining town in Arizona where essentially the local bank, had to be shut down because there was so much theft by a manager of that bank to the tune of well over $1 million that basically federal auditors had to come in and eventually shut down the bank. So essentially, this small bank was shut down because this manager had stolen well over $1 million from that as well. And then I was assigned as an attorney to essentially, because there's bonds and other items that a bank has to hold, to go after and sue this individual who stole this money. And then she was also being federally prosecuted for bank theft and embezzlement. But I walked to that court in a small kind of county here in Arizona, and I'd say, "Well, I'm here for this case." And the people would say, "Oh, the wedding." And I go, okay, not thinking, well, what does it have to do with the wedding? And it happened a couple of times every time I appeared in this small court setting. The bailiff would say something, or the security guard would say something, oh, the wedding. And along those lines. And eventually, about the fourth time it happened, I said, what do you, wedding? I mean, I'm here because of employment, employee theft. And they go, oh, no. See, this lady had a daughter who got married, had the most extravagant wedding the town had ever seen. Horse-drawn carriages, all this money, open bar, free open bar, things like that. And so everyone in town was thinking, where is she getting this money? Where does this come from? And lo and behold, it's because she had stolen 7 figures from the bank that shut down within this community. And so everyone kind of said, "Oh, it's the wedding," because that's how they remembered her because of that. And I always thought to myself, well, if everyone in town can see it, how did the bank not see it? How did the actual leadership not see it?
Mhm.
And that this shows me the example that a lot of times people know, employees know, other people see things, and so that's why you have to foster that environment where people feel comfortable to talk.
If you find out your employee's kid is on my super sweet 16, there's a red flag that they are not just stocking shelves.
Yeah, yeah. If there's a Sweet Sense 16 or a Quinceanera that's, here in Arizona, those will often happen. That's a lot more extravagant than it should be. Yeah, that's as an employer, I'd be a little bit questioning that.
Fair enough. How do people get in touch if they're suspecting this is the situation?
Well, I certainly, we certainly love to help our clients and help those in those circumstances. And often I'll have situations where individuals also have me come and discuss it in a general meeting setting or a group meeting with businesses. So I'm happy to do so. But they can certainly come to my law firm, give us a call or visit our website as well. For those who might be outside the state of Arizona or don't have Arizona ties. Even my website is a good resource as well because I have multiple blog posts about employment theft, which would be good even if you're in Europe or in the East Coast and have nothing to do with Arizona. It might give you some great suggestions on how to move forward, and I'm happy to help and answer questions as necessary.
Absolutely. While jurisdiction to jurisdiction will vary, that feels like when you get down to it, this is really good advice for anyone. So thank you
Yeah.
very much, Matthew.
Well, thanks so much. Appreciate having you today with
Yeah,
me.
great to talk with you. And thank you to our listeners. If you suspect this is something that you have a friend or colleague that suspects something's going on and they would benefit from this, please do share it. Thank you all. Have a good day.